All right, let's talk about a year that, well, it pretty much changed everything. We're diving into 536 AD, a year when, for all intents and purposes, the sun just died.
And look, that's not me just being dramatic. That's a quote from Michael McCormick, a Harvard historian. I mean, this guy has studied all of human history, every war, every famine, every plague you can think of, and he picked this year. That is a massive claim. So you have to ask, what on earth happened?
Seriously, think about it for a second. You know about the Black Death, right? Wiped out a massive chunk of Europe. Or the Spanish flu in 1918, which hit a third of the entire planet. So to say 536 was worse than that? Whoa. Something absolutely insane must have gone down.
And this is where the story gets really weird. It didn't start with a plague or a war. It started with the sky. In the spring of 536, this mysterious fog just rolled in. And it stayed. For 18 long months, much of the world was stuck in this bizarre, endless twilight.
You don't have to take my word for it. This is from a guy who was actually there, a Byzantine historian named Procopius. He wrote that the sun gave off its light without brightness, kind of like the moon. Can you even imagine that? Looking up and seeing the sun, but it's powerless. No warmth, just this pale, ghostly circle in the sky. That was the reality for millions of people, day in and day out.
So, okay, what happens when the sun basically turns off? Well, for starters, it gets cold, really cold. Procopius said that even at high noon, the sun didn't cast any shadows. And without sunlight, plants can't grow. Crops failed everywhere. We have records from Ireland talking about a failure of bread for 3 years straight. This was a full-blown global food crisis.
And get this, it wasn't just happening in Europe, not by a long shot. Way over in China, their historical records describe this strange yellow dust falling like snow. And they even wrote that it snowed in August, in the middle of summer. That's what really tells you this was a massive, massive event, covering the entire northern hemisphere. So for more than 1,000 years, nobody knew why this happened. All they had were these terrifying stories passed down through generations. People just assumed it was the gods being angry or some kind of cosmic curse. The real cause was a total mystery, until modern science finally cracked the case.
And the answer? It's something called a volcanic winter. Basically, a ridiculously huge volcano erupts and it shoots so much ash and sulfur way up into the atmosphere that it creates this giant sun shield. It literally blocks the sunlight from reaching Earth, reflecting it back into space and causing temperatures to just plummet.
Okay, so how in the world did we figure that out? Well, it's pretty cool, actually. Scientists went to a glacier in Switzerland and drilled down really deep, pulling out these long tubes of ice called ice cores. Each layer of ice is like a snapshot in time. And guess what they found in the layer from the spring of 536 AD? Tiny microscopic bits of volcanic glass. Boom. That was the smoking gun. A colossal volcanic eruption was our culprit.
But here's the crazy part. The volcano, as absolutely awful as it was, that wasn't even the worst of it. Nope, that was just the beginning. It was the spark that was about to light a much, much bigger fire.
It was like a series of dominoes, each one knocking over the next. The eruption in 536, that was the first domino. It led to years of crop failure and famine. That's the second domino. And then, in 541, with everyone already weak and starving, the final domino fell. The Plague of Justinian, the first ever recorded pandemic of the bubonic plague.
So why was this plague so unbelievably deadly? It's actually pretty straightforward. A healthy population, people who are well-fed, they have a decent shot at fighting off a disease. But the people living in 541, they had just gone through years of darkness, cold, and starvation. Their immune systems were completely shot. They were malnourished, they were weak, they were sitting ducks. And the result? It's just staggering. An estimated 50 million people died. That's not a typo, 50 million. That was almost half the population of the entire world at the time. It was this devastating 1-2 punch, the volcanic winter, then the plague, that cemented 536's reputation. It wasn't just a bad year. It kicked off a nightmare that lasted for generations. You know, a disaster this huge doesn't just end when the dying stops. It leaves a deep, deep scar on the people who survive.
The trauma was so profound that it actually worked its way into their stories, their myths, their legends for centuries to come.
Just take a look at Scandinavia. Archaeologists have dug up proof that as many as 75% of villages in some areas were just abandoned, gone. Society was literally collapsing. People either died or they just ran, leaving ghost towns everywhere. And this is where things get really fascinating, where history starts to sound a lot like mythology.
A lot of historians are convinced that this real-life event is the origin of the Norse myth of Fimbulwinter, from the stories about Thor and Loki. In the myths, Fimbulwinter is this terrible 3-year winter where the sun vanishes, and it's the sign that Ragnarok, the end of the world, is about to begin. The connection is just uncanny, right? A real multi-year winter becomes the myth. A literal dark age becomes the beginning of the apocalypse.
And that's the thing you have to remember. For the people living through it, the ancestors of the Vikings, this wasn't some cool story. It wasn't a prophecy. The sun was actually gone. The food had run out. People were dying all around them. For them, the apocalypse was very, very real. It was their daily life.
So when you put it all together, 536 AD wasn't just a bad year. It was a tipping point, a single event in nature that kicked off 100 years of hardship, helped bring down empires, and ushered in the era we call the Dark Ages, an age that began literally in darkness.
It's a pretty humbling story, isn't it? It really shows you that no matter how advanced we think we are, our whole global system still depends on the planet behaving itself. And if one volcano could do all that damage 1,500 years ago, it really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? How resilient